Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It is 6:46. We'll call this meeting back to order. It's the October 18th Penfield School Board meeting, and Kathleen will lead us in the pledge. Please rise. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I missed a sentence or something. I don't know what happened there. I don't think you should follow me. I think I skipped something there. Alrighty, where are we? Board members, may I have a motion, please, and a second, that the board approves the October 18th agenda as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
Movement by Emily, second by Mark. All those in favor? All in favor, none opposed. May I please also have a motion and a second that a board approves the consent agenda as listed?
So moved. Second.
Motion by Catherine, second by Kristen. All those in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Thank you. Tonight we have a treasurer's report that you received in your packet. May I please have a motion and a second that the board approve the treasurer's report, including the cash report, general fund reports, and school lunch fund reports as of the month ending August 31st, 2022.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mark, second by Catherine. All those in favor? All in favor, none opposed. And then we have Lila. Hi, Lila.
Hi, good evening. So just a couple of updates tonight, starting at PHS. So we had our last home football game against McQuaid last Friday, and it was also our senior night. And we also have tonight is girls volleyball and field hockey senior nights at 7 p.m. Both the field hockey team and Leo's Club participated in the Making Strides Against Breast Cancer walk this past weekend. Many PHS students also were involved in the Best Buddies Empire State Games for the physically challenged. And Student Council is continuing to host Socktober, which is an annual sock drive to benefit the Open Door mission. So we are asking that people bring in new socks for all of October. And we've continued to have rock dogs, the therapy dogs in the building, which has been really nice. At Bay Trail, health classes learned about and simulated the effects of alcohol. 8th graders in technology are building bridges to see which bridge will be able to hold the most weight. And at the elementary schools, on this Sunday, Scribner will be hosting its annual pancake breakfast at Dawn's Original. At Cobbles, 1st graders in music class are learning about tempo and speeds of music. Indian Landing will also be hosting its pancake breakfast on Saturday. And at Harris Hill, the cheer team participated in the Battle of the Birdhouse, a cheer competition, over the weekend, with all of Harris Hill teams placing either first or second. Thank you.
Wow, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lila.
Questions for Lila?
All right.
All right, so that brings us to superintendent reports.
So we have, I just have a couple staff and student honors, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Maloney, who's going to give a recap on Superintendent's Conference Day, and then over to Dr. Driffill for some business updates, which includes, believe it or not, the budget calendar for building the next school year's budget.
Mm-hmm.
So first, I'd just like to thank our school board. This is New York State School Boards Association Week of School Board Recognition to promote awareness of the important work performed by our board members as they guide our schools and promote a healthy culture in which to learn and work. And so thank you on behalf of the district to the board members for your dedication, volunteerism, and all you do for our student, staff, and community. And so you do have a few lovely gifts. There are some from the Monroe County School Board Association. There is, and I'm going to ask Emily Belser, our board vice president, we did put together a little nominal token. So can you tell me what it says on the popcorn bag that Kathleen put together? I think there's a little, is there a little saying?
Life is butter with you.
Life is butter with you. So
That's very sweet. Kathy.
thankfully,
Thank you.
Kathleen has like amazing Pinterest qualities that I do not. So I just wanted to give kudos for the board clerk and her role with this. So So truly, thank you. The other thing that the district has done for many years now is around books and our love of reading and our love of our libraries. And so working with our K-12 library chair, 2 books have been selected. All of them will be at our elementary schools. One is a primary K-2 book and one is more 3-5 book. But if you open, especially our newer board members and Lila, if you open the cover, there should be a dedication sticker. And so your names are on them to head into our elementary schools where there are now many years of board members' names and student rep names on books in our libraries. And yeah, they do get taken out, and I'll tell you, having been there in the elementary schools, when the kids find those at the elementary, they think it's just really cool. So, so again, thank you very much for your service and all the volunteer hours you put in, and thank you truly. And then just to show you how much, I have a picture of all of you up here on this slide for our community as well. And again, I do appreciate it. Outside of the big 5 school districts in New York State, all school members are volunteer, 100%. So again, thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I wanted to also just mention a district recognition that the Penfield Central School District is being recognized by the Rochester Area Employment Network with a business award as part of its National Disability Employment Awareness Month celebration on October 20th. Penfield is being honored for its inclusive efforts in hiring and accommodating an individual with a disability as a member of our cleaning staff. So truly, part of this comes from the organization, and their true thanks to our Director of Facilities, George English, and Head Custodian, Robert Lovelace, for their efforts in welcoming and supporting this staff member. And so the work we do in talking about being inclusive and granting equity and access isn't just for our students, but our staff, and a belief in terms of helping everybody reach their full potential. And with more minds around the table, those who think alike and those who think differently, we actually become stronger and better. So thank you very much for supporting me to support the district, and also thank you for Dr. Kenny, obviously, as our Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, does the hiring and works through that process. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Maloney, who's going to walk us through a little background and then our Superintendent's Conference Day.
Thank you, Dr. Putnam. So, as you may recall, October 7th, Friday, October 7th, was a K-12 Superintendent's Conference Day. So, our model the past 2 years has been to focus on professional learning aligned with the district priorities at our monthly instructional leadership team meetings with all administrators. And during these instructional leadership team meetings, Senior Cabinet models the professional learning for the faculty meetings. Then the administrators have an opportunity to provide feedback, and we can answer questions. Then the building administrators turnkey the professional learning from that instructional leadership team meeting at their building faculty meetings. So the beautiful thing about October is the faculty meetings fall the same week as Superintendent's Conference Day. So this allows us to facilitate professional learning at the faculty meeting, which sets the stage, if you will, for the professional learning on the conference day. So you'll see here the topics that were presented at the faculty meetings: grading for equity, how grading connects to the culturally responsive sustaining education framework, and then on Superintendent's Conference Day, an introduction to the guiding document for grading. And I know the presentation is about the Superintendent's Conference Day, but I really can't do the presentation on Superintendent's Conference Day without giving you some background on the faculty meetings. So during the faculty meeting session, participants revisited the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. The purpose of the document, the 4 principles, and remember those 4 principles are welcoming and affirming environment, inclusive curriculum and assessment, high expectations and rigorous instruction, and ongoing professional learning and support. Participants also took a deep dive into how grading connects with each of those 4 principles through the lens of the teacher guidelines outlined in the framework. And as I mentioned, this professional learning was a perfect lead into the superintendent's conference day, in which the curriculum and instruction team, myself and the curriculum directors, shared the draft of the guiding document for grading. So I do want to remind both the board and the community the visual representation of the culturally responsive sustaining education framework. So you have the tree with the students at the core, and the branches, which may be difficult to read, those are the stakeholders. So district leaders, school leaders, high education faculty, community members, teachers, students and families, even education department policymakers. And then the leaves, the bunches of leaves, are the 4 principles which I mentioned previously. And the framework provides guidelines for each of the stakeholder groups which are represented on the branches. And these guidelines are organized by those 4 principles. So when you think of grading practices, the connection which is most obvious is probably the principle of inclusive curriculum and assessment. And then followed by high expectations and rigorous instruction. And what teachers discovered during the faculty meeting sessions was that grading practices connect also with the principle of welcoming and affirming environment, as well as ongoing professional learning and support. So let me give you an example. Allowing a student to retake an assessment after completing additional learning can be very welcoming and affirming to a student. Sending the message that it's okay to try again, not all of us learn at the same pace, and that the teacher believes in the student's abilities. So, and then from an ongoing professional learning and support perspective, digging deeper into equitable grading practices for some requires ongoing professional learning and support. And we actually asked teachers to give feedback during the superintendent's conference day relative to what professional learning support they may need. So let's dig in a little bit deeper to the guiding document for grading. So all faculty K-12 participated in a session on Superintendent's Conference Day, as I shared, where we shared with them the draft of the guiding document for grading. So during these sessions, faculty discussed the why for conversations on grading. They reviewed current grading practices to find ways to make grading more relevant and fair, and to make grades more meaningful and representative of students' learning. Participants then reviewed the draft of the guiding document for grading, outlining aspects they liked about the document, questions they had, as well as suggestions for implementation, because this was the first time that they had seen the document. They were then given time to collaboratively work as grade level teams or department teams to provide feedback relative to the implementation of the practices outlined in the document, as well as any professional learning their team may need. So what is the guiding document for grading? Last year, I facilitated the Grading for Equity Committee. It was comprised of 4 students, 7 parents, 5 teachers, and 5 administrators. And as a committee, we focused on recent literature around equitable grading practices, particularly the use of zeros versus a minimum grade, allowing redos and retakes, as well as extra credit. And the charge of this committee is on the next slide. So Grading for Equity reviews grading practices for accuracy, bias resistance, and intrinsic motivation. Grades must accurately reflect a student's academic level of performance while excluding non-academic criteria such as behavior, in addition to using mathematically sound calculations and scales. The Grading for Equity Committee will review current literature on grading to establish common grading practices which can be implemented across grade levels K-12 to ensure grades are equitable and not inflated or deflated. So the committee took this charge very seriously and dug into reviewing the current literature and developing the draft of the guiding document for grading. We also took a look Some of you may be familiar, Pittsford has a similar document. We looked at other schools to see what direction they have taken. And the next slide shows a visual of the journey that the committee took to get to the draft of the guiding document for grading. And so you'll see, we started by examining current grading practices, developing a definition for the purpose of grading, determining the grading principles, which you will see, set expectations and practices for those grading principles, and then all together this became the draft of the guiding document for grading. So this next slide is the first paragraph, the opening paragraph of the draft of the guiding document for grading, and I'll just read it for those at home. Penfield Central School District is committed to the principles set forth by the New York State Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework. It was very important for the committee that the document be grounded in the Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework because that the principles of the framework are driving our district priorities. The district's commitment to provide each student with a learning environment inclusive of equitable grading practices for all aligns with the 4 principles of the Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework, and they're listed there. As referenced in the Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework, equitable grading practices afford students opportunities to use critical reasoning, take academic risks, and leverage a growth mindset to learn from mistakes. So that comes directly from the Culturally Responsive Sustaining Education Framework. And I think the big purpose here is really bringing consistency, not only across grade levels, but within grade level bands, K-5, 6-8, and 9-12. The next slide highlights the grading purposes as outlined in the draft of the guiding document for grading. I think it's important to note the first purpose is all about students, which is in alignment with the board's goal of educating the whole student. So we believe the foremost purpose of grades is to provide feedback to students and their families to be used for self-evaluation and growth and to communicate students' progress towards meeting learning targets and/or standards. We believe the secondary purpose of grades is to evaluate effectiveness of curricular, instructional, and assessment practices. And then this last bullet speaks to the consistency piece. Grading practices must consistently represent student learning independent of the student's school or classroom teacher. It shouldn't matter, for example, which section of living environment a student is taking, whether they're taking the course at Bay Trail as an 8th grader or at PHS as a 10th grader. If the course is the same, students should be graded using the same grading practices. So the document is divided into 3 grading principles, and each principle has expectations and practices which are aligned. So you'll see the first grading principle, grades accurately represent what students know, understand, and can do. And then expectations and practices A and B speak to purposeful assignments, not busy work. So expectation A, assignments and assessments must be aligned to standards. Expectation B, assignments are purposeful and meaningful with clear learning targets and success criteria. And then expectation C and D, again, speak to the need for consistency. Expectation C, a common syllabus is used by all teachers of the same grade level and/or course. Expectation D, a common grade book, weighting of grades, is used by all teachers of the same grade level and of course. I think it's important to note that some of these principles, expectations, and practices are currently occurring across the K-12 continuum within the district, which is one of the reasons why we ask teachers for feedback specifically around when their department or grade level would be ready to implement these expectations and practices. We recognize that we're going to need to differentiate the professional learning for teams and for departments as we work to implement the document. Grading principle 2 is about grades reflecting student learning and academic progress only. So grading procedures measure, report, and document academic progress and achievement separately from work habits, character traits, and behaviors. So expectation A, extra credit is not given. So when extra credit is factored in, grades become inflated and do not reflect student academic progress. So in my own practice as a high school math teacher, I remember giving extra credit to students if they took their syllabus home and had it signed the first night by a parent or guardian and brought it back. And what I did not understand at that time is that grade, which I referred to as the syllabus assignment, did not reflect any of the math concepts or skills which I should have been teaching at that time. Expectation B, no academic grade should designate a level beyond grade level standards. So I think some folks become confused by this. So while there are opportunities for students to exceed grade level standards, assessments and report cards should reflect the learning and behavior standards for that specific grade. So again, for consistency. So I'll use the example, Steve and I are both in algebra. The grade on the report card should reflect our learning on the content and skills in the algebra course, not geometry. So let's say Steve has mastered the content and skills in algebra and has begun working on content and skills in geometry. That should be communicated to his family and reflected on the report card. So it should be reflected that he's mastered algebra and that he has begun the geometry. And I think we'll need to take a look at how that's communicated across our grade levels K-12. And then expectation C, learning behaviors such as attendance, class participation, work habits, and preparation are important. We're not saying that they aren't. We agree they are important, but should be reflected separately, not in a student's academic grade. So some learning behaviors are outside of a student's control. I'll use attendance for an example. A student may be late to class every day, not because they can't get out of bed, but because the adult who drives them arrives to school late every day. So we really feel it's important that grades should reflect academic progress. We do believe that learning behaviors need to be reported just separately on the report card. And then the third principle, before I review grading principle 3, I want you to think about life outside of the K-12 continuum. Can you think of a test or assessment which you are not allowed to retake? Your driver's test, your bar exam. This grading principle 3 is all about allowing students to recover from initial failure and reflect current student learning, giving students the opportunity to retake, to relearn, and to show that they've made the learning. So expectation A, grading policies should motivate students to learn. Grading policies should not create a circumstance where failure is inevitable, causing a student to be unmotivated to do more work. Therefore, the missing assignment option should be used in gradebooks as opposed to zeros. So the missing assignment, that is an option that Infinite Campus allows teachers to use. Think about the traditional 0 through 100 grading scale. So 0 through 64 is failing, and 65 through 100 is passing. So there are 65 opportunities, 0 through 64, for a failing grade, but only 35 opportunities, 65 to 100, for a passing grade. So that begs the question, is that grading scale fair? So think about the impact when a 0 is factored in on a grade, and how the 0 pulls that grade deeper into a hole that can be very challenging for students to come out of. And that's what grading expectation A speaks to. And then expectation B allows students the opportunity to retest, resubmit, and/or correct work to demonstrate learning. So this speaks to the question I posed at the beginning of the slide. We are all learning at different paces. If a student can demonstrate the learning, even though there's been an assessment, should the student have the opportunity to demonstrate that learning, and should that be reflected in the grade? And that's what we're saying here, allowing that opportunity to retest. Expectation C, reassessment need not be the same form as the original assessment. The form of the reassessment will be at the teacher's discretion and will focus on the student's areas of needed growth. So expectation C speaks to the how of reassessment, and this allows teachers flexibility in how a student demonstrates their learning. Students can demonstrate the learning in multiple ways, and this just gives that flexibility to the teachers. And then expectation D, no academic grade lower than a 50% will be used in grade calculations. So using 50 as the lowest grade possible lessens the opportunities for failure and helps to avoid that hole, which can be really challenging to come out of. So those of you who have had students go through PHS may be aware that PHS, the lowest grade a student can earn for a quarter marking period is 55 for the first half of a course. Whether that course is a year-long course, that would be marking period 1 and 2. If it's a half-year course, it would be the first marking period of that course. And this helps to avoid that challenging hole. So we already have in place a policy similar, but expectations D would put into place the 50 for assignments and exams. So what does this mean in terms of next steps? This is a lot to unpack, so that's why I want to stress this document is in draft form, and I want to remind folks of that. And after reviewing the initial feedback from the teachers, we're going to, as I mentioned, need to differentiate the approach to implementation, meaning different teams and departments. We're going to have to really specialize the professional learning, and we knew this going in. Full implementation is probably 3 years out. We need to work not only with the teachers, but also with families. And I've listed the next steps here. We're working currently on the first bullet, reviewing feedback from faculty and setting attainable implementation guidelines, timelines, excuse me. Create professional learning opportunities based on the feedback from faculty. Develop a communication plan for families. Determine parameters for redos and retakes. Establish a district grading scale, outline exemplars and models for grade books, and investigate infinite campus capabilities to support the work. Before I take questions, I do want to comment on a common question which comes up. Are we prepping students for college by changing our grading practices? And ironically, the assistant superintendents for curriculum and instruction from the east side of Monroe County, we get together monthly. And prior to COVID, the ASIs had worked with a group of college admissions representatives, and specifically around these grading practices. And the feedback was very positive from the college admissions representatives because they feel that grading practices such as this help to ensure that students' grades are not inflated or deflated. And that utilizing these types of grading practices allow and afford better representations of student learning. So we're still having the conversation. The conversation has come up again around hosting a panel discussion for families around college admissions and grading and how it all connects. So we've been talking about that at the table. The other piece which I found to be very interesting, many instructors at the college level are instituting grading practices, are reviewing their grading practices and implementing grading practices which are more equitable. So I think that's it. So I just gave you a lot of information. Are there any questions I can answer?
Questions? Mark?
Yep. I have to say that there's so much good stuff in here. I mean, it really is great. There's a number of things that I really liked about this, and I could go on and on. But you know, the main things is I didn't see anywhere in the word test, right? Test is one of those things, as you mentioned, the driver's test. It's does someone have the adequate level of competency? But that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to not see if they have the competency, but give them the competency. And so when you're talking about grading and assessment and repeating things, the whole thing is to keep moving forward until you get them to the competency that we want them to receive. So I think this whole change of approach is really, meets our mission, which is educating them, not testing them. And I did like that when you're 4 principals, of course, people see some principals and they forget that the others are in there. We still have high expectations and rigorous instruction. That didn't go away. We just added more facets to education. And then the last thing is really more of a question, which is I'm kind of curious as to the contribution the students had in that working group you had.
So, how the students were selected for the committee. Students completed an interest form. And I'll be honest, having worked many years with high school students, I wasn't sure what responses I would get, if I would get anyone who wanted to just fill out Dr. Maloney's form as Donald Duck or something, I've had students fill out forms with lots of interesting names in the past. And it was fascinating, the responses. All the responses were very serious, and students talked about their experiences with grading and their experiences with being in classes with different grading practices, and how they can see the impact not only on their grades, but from a welcoming and affirming perspective, and that they want to advocate for more equitable grading practices. And I actually put the interest form out again to see and I have more students who are interested. And the theme is very similar across the students in terms of they've seen how grading practices impact their learning and how their participation in a class, their engagement in a class, and they want to advocate and dig into this work. And it's great to have student voice at the table.
Thank you.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I have 2 actually. One, I want to reiterate what Mark said, just the whole idea of it's not how quickly we get kids there, we want to get them there. And it's really about mastery. We want them to all master those concepts that we're teaching them. So I really think this is a shift in grading, that mindset of grading, but I think it's really truly reflective of the real world that we live in. If I go teach a lesson to my 2nd graders and it bombs, well, I'm going back to the drawing board and I'm going to redo it as a teacher. If an engineer is making something and their prototype fails, they're going back to the drawing board and they're going to redo it. They're not just going to, oh, I got a 0, moving on. It is what it is. So I really think it's truly reflective of what they're going to face in the real world. And then just policy 3, or principle 3 with A around the whole missing assignment piece. I can just really connect to that with my own child. During COVID, he was missing assignments. We missed it, and he just started to self-sabotage because he didn't feel like he could get out of it. And this type of policy would have really facilitated that growth mindset of I can still get there. It's a missing assignment, doesn't mean I can't get there. But he was like, oh my gosh, I have all these assignments. How do I get out of this hole? And he just really got in a downward spiral of self-sabotaging, like what's the purpose anymore? So I think this really is going to benefit kids. So thanks for all the hard work you're doing.
Thanks, Kristen.
Board members, other questions? I have a.
Processing.
Oh, I know. I'm processing. It takes me a while. But I have just 2 things. First, I just want to say thank you, because I know this work started like way pre-COVID, that looking at grading, and I appreciate you bringing up that meeting, because I know, and then things get way late, and I love how we're sort of coming back to things and bringing student voice in. Same thing like with the code of conduct work, like we're getting back on track. And we're bringing in all these different voices, so I appreciate that work. I also just want to make a note about being purposeful and taking time to get feedback and more feedback in this 3-year process. And especially, I was just reading about state ed and them looking at the regents and the new committee, I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head right now, that they're putting together with the stakeholders. It's going to take 2 years to figure out, like, are we doing regents anymore? Are we not? How's that going to play into all this and grading in college admission? And so I think we're on a good path forward, but it's also purposeful and not rushed. So thank you. I'm sure you have things you want to say too.
My turn?
It's your turn.
I did a good job listening and not jumping in. No, I just kudos to the team, and just ditto Lisa's thank you, Dr. Maloney, because it really is. You really summed up, like, I don't know, 3 years in an entire superintendent's conference day in a good 20 minutes. So we understand how many hours, discussions, listening, revising. And then, we are allowing, obviously, the teachers, the practitioner in the classroom who's providing grades and working with students to work with the draft and learn, trying to put, 300 teachers into a room to say, let's create a grading policy is not the right way to do it. So putting something in front of folks and then working through it. I also like, and I know our district is always focused on research, and so the research on grading. And many years ago, I got to write a dissertation on grading, which no one will ever read, including me, because I'm done with it. But it really, the biggest piece, one of the biggest takeaways is that when you look at school nationally, teachers K-12 are many times using grading practices that they had done to them when they were in K-12 school. So there's very little research in our colleges, and when we see changes out of our teacher prep colleges, but there's not much talk about the best way to grade or the research around grading or motivation and how do we get kids to work towards full potential. And so this is great. This is like stuff to wrestle with and take a look at, and for some teachers, they're already on board, and others, it's like, well, I've been grading this way for a long time, I want to keep it. But when you talk about research and look at evidence-based strategies, that's helpful. And the one for me, which I love about this as a former high school principal, is something that sometimes gets tossed around the culture of copying. So Penfield, like many school districts, is a high-achieving school. Our students are trying to do their best, and when assignment like homework is a 0 if it's not in the beginning of class, it can create a culture of copying. That, like, last night I had a game, then I had to go babysit my sister, and then I had to wake up early. I didn't get a chance to do the homework. If it's not in, it's a 0, and now one of my options is to just copy it and hand somebody else's work in. So no learning, you get the grade maybe, or you get caught, and now we're talking about plagiarism, and which can get you in trouble in high school, but really in college and the workplace. So really this helps is that if it's not a 0, but a missing with an opportunity to hand it back in, again, I think about the real world and the research around if you go to your boss early and say, I need a little extra time, in the vast majority of roles, they'll work with you. And so I just think that's really great in terms of, again, trying to focus it on the learning, not the grade. And we've gotten much better, but as a former, many years ago, 5th grade teacher, you shared that you had extra credit, which is your syllabus. I can probably tell you I regret all the time, but it was you got 10 extra points if you brought a box of Kleenex in. So great, because I needed Kleenex in my room. It was not Penfield that provides Kleenex. It was another district, but the reality is that grade means nothing. They brought Kleenex in, or they didn't bring it in. So the extra credit is really those things we talk about that have nothing to do with the learning, but just to inflate your grade, as opposed to saying, if you want to get your grade up, come and meet with me, let's go over it, and then you can take the essay again and see if you can do better. So I'm excited about this work. I love the timeline. I love how again, it's not happening tomorrow. We're digging into the work, but so please thank you for your entire team and the work that everybody put in, the principals and teachers and parents, and really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all, and I'm sure I'll be back to keep you updated as we go along, so thank you.
And now we've got Dr. Driffill with some business updates.
All right, thanks, Dr. Putnam. Good evening, board. Just two definitely not as fascinating topics from my office this evening. So the first discussion about the 2023-2024 budget development process. We'll review the draft calendar before we approve it at our next meeting. And then later on the agenda this evening for your approval, there's a tax correction. I don't have a slide for it, but what it was is the county assessor's office didn't apply an exemption. So the County let us know that we had issued a new tax bill. Our threshold for a refund or a correction is $3,000. This one is more than that, so we're seeking board approval to issue that new bill. So here is the draft budget calendar for the 23-24 year. So as I mentioned at our next meeting, the board would look to approve this calendar. At our December 6th Board of Education meeting, we'll review the annual budget development goals, guidelines, and factors, and as well review the annual reserve fund plan, and then any available budget updates available at that time. At our January 10th meeting, after the turn of the calendar, we'll approve those budget development goals, guidelines, and factors after taking in any board feedback, and we'll review again any available budget updates. At the second meeting in January, we will assess early revenue information. So typically this is when we have the governor's executive budget proposal to understand the ramifications of state aid. And we should have a good idea of what our tax cap calculation is as it relates to local funding. For the
Did I tell you we put a bowling alley in upstairs?
for the February 7th meeting, we'll approve that levy calculation. We'll review the expenditure draft, and we'll also have our Director of Transportation here to speak to the board about his department's budget for the following year. By March 1st, we need to submit that local levy to the New York State Comptroller, the State Education Department, and the State Department of Tax and Finance. At our March 7th meeting, we'll have any applicable budget appropriation updates, and we'll have our Director of Facilities here to discuss his department's budget. At the March 21st meeting, again, we'll do any kind of gap analysis as it relates to our revenue and projected expenditures. At that meeting, we need to identify any separate budget propositions, such as a bus purchase, and we need to approve the notice of budget hearing and vote, because by March 31st, we need to publish the first notice of the budget hearing and vote. 4 publications have to go out before the vote, 45 days prior, so that's why it's that last week of March. At our meeting scheduled for April 18th, we'll adopt the budget. We'll ask the board to do so. We'll appoint election officials, and then we'll also approve and disseminate the property tax report card to the State Education Department and local media. By April 25th, we have to have the full budget document posted on our websites and available in our buildings. And then the annual budget hearing, where we review the proposed budget in a comprehensive fashion, will take place on May 2nd. That's when the community has opportunity to ask questions as it relates to the budget process or anything therein. Thereafter, we send our budget notice out to the community. That's a requirement to do right after the budget hearing. And then this year, that third Tuesday in May, is May 16th. It's the annual meeting. It's the statewide budget vote and Board of Education election. I don't know why that last slide is.
We do it again.
Last
That's
day
what-
was there. It's interesting.
We do it twice?
Yeah.
Oh, goody.
Before there's board questions, I did make a comment about a bowling alley for people who might be watching at home. There is no bowling alley, but it is our award-winning robotics team upstairs doing some serious work. So that is the noise you're hearing. Thanks, Dan.
I figured that. Board members, questions for Dan on the budget calendar? No, it seems weird. Here we are again.
I know. I know.
Thank you, Dan.
That concludes superintendent reports.
All right. All right, that brings us to public comment period this evening. Instructions to participate in public comment period are listed in the agenda and also available for you all online. The board will not be responding to comments during this session, but any concerns raised will be referred to district administrators for follow-up. Comments are limited to 3 minutes or less and should not name a specific student or staff in public session. Please be respectful of others in your words, conduct, demeanor, and adhere to our code of conduct. We have 2 speakers this evening. Our first speaker is Mr. Leonardo. What a room today. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Carmen Leonardo, and I am here tonight on behalf of Penfield United for Education Excellence. As parents, educators, and community members, we are saddened at our collective loss last week, and we offer our most heartfelt and sincere condolences to the entire district community. At the September 20th board meeting, I asked that the requirement that speakers during public comment period be compelled to state their address be removed. I also asked that a synopsis of the speaker's comments to the board be included in the meeting minutes. And unfortunately, the board continues to ignore the relevance of these requests, and I wonder if the board even understands what they are. I say that because in an email I received from the board president, she states that the board is required to publish minutes on actionable items on their meeting. While the board is not required to list the names of public speakers in the minutes, we plan to continue this practice. This reply makes absolutely no sense unless it's an attempt to stonewall the public. So again, I ask, please remove the requirement that speakers state their address. You already have this on record, and publish a synopsis of speakers' comments in the official minutes. At the September 6th meeting, I brought to your attention that in our schools, we proudly display the totalitarian fist of oppression. It's been brought to my attention earlier today that this also appears in an elementary art class. And walking down the hall here this evening, I see plenty of images of this fist of oppression. And as a fine example of cognitive dissonance, you proudly display this very same symbol to our children. At your table is another example. Chairman Xi, leader of the Chinese Communist Party, and his lieutenants holding up the same fist of oppression. How does the board feel about this totalitarian display to our children? Do you condone it? How does the board and the superintendent feel about this totalitarian display in the workplace? Is it appropriate? I know you will hide behind your rules and you won't answer me here. And for this continued lack of transparency, you should be ashamed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Our next speaker this evening is Mr. Barbero. Good evening.
Pastor Dave Barbero, 1238 Blossom Road. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1. Genesis 1:27, so God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. Creation is where the Bible story begins, and it is where our thinking about transgender ideology must begin. True freedom, according to Scripture, is not found in asserting or our radical independence and trying to be who we're not created to be. True freedom is found in embracing and being who we are created to be. A fish that decides to make a bid for freedom by jumping out of the water will not be free because it is created to live in the environment of water. As soon as we try to become what we're not, we can't expect to flourish. We are created beings. We are God's masterpieces, flawed but still his masterpieces. Through the work of the Holy Spirit, he is in the process of restoring his works of art. John Wyatt, in his book Matters of Life and Death, talk about the art of restoration view as it relates to God's restoration plan for humanity. I quote, "If you see a work of art and you're asked to restore it, you don't look at it and say, well, I think he would look much nicer with a pair of spectacles, or this scene would look much better with a car instead of a hay cart. To do that is to break the code of art restorer. Art restorers respect the work, They know that their job is to bring out the artist's original intention. They work at cleaning and restoring the vivid colors. They study the work and the painter so they can carefully get it back to what it once was. They work so that people can see the original in all its glory. Humanity, too, is the work of an artist, a divine artist. Humankind is God's masterpiece, the pinnacle of his work of creation. Genesis tells us that when he looked at Adam and Eve, he declared them very good. So identity is not for us to create. That's already been established. It sounds very freeing to say you can become who you want to be, but our actual identity and that way of thinking is completely invented and therefore fluid and profoundly unstable. It's no wonder that our children suffer from identity crisis. Perhaps that explains the profound insecurity and anxiety of many children and young people today. The reality is this: you're either working with God in his restoration project or you're working against him. There's no middle ground. One day we'll all stand before him to answer for our decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Board members, that brings us to item 6. Keep whacking that, sorry. Be it resolved that, how do you say that? Oh, that name? I'm not, no. That Ms. Jackson is appointed as attendance keeper at Scribner Elementary effective October 3rd, 2022 for the remainder of the 22-23 school year. May I have a motion, please, and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Mark, second by Emily. All those in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Sorry about that. I didn't want to mispronounce that name. And then we're moving on to the tax correction. No facilities items tonight, so financial items that Dr. Driffill mentioned. So may I have a motion, please, and a second that a board approve the corrected tax bill as described above.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Kristen, second by Catherine. All those in favor? All in favor, none opposed. Thank you. So that moves us to our committee meetings. Krista, were you able to attend legislative? And if so, could you share?
Yes, I did. Once again, it was a lovely meeting. Food was involved, so I was very present. It was a smaller group. We had 2 co-chairs, Mark Kakanovich and Sarah Pelucio. And then our Monroe County School Board Association Executive Director addressed us, Amy Thomas. She just gave us a little update on what's going on in the school board world. And then most of the meeting was spent, they broke us up into a few groups and we got together and we were able to collaborate and share ideas on a few position papers that people were concerned about. So there was a lot of, my table, we collaborated a lot on the language. It was not very inclusive. Some policies were outdated and just did not make sense anymore. And we were able to give this feedback back to our co-chairs, and they were going to take it back to the committee and work on it. Yeah, and that was it. So it was productive.
Great, thank you. Are there questions for Krista on that? No? All right. Awesome. And then, Catherine, were you able to attend Info Exchange?
Yep, I was there and they did a presentation on ACT for Education, which some of you may be familiar with already. ACT stands for A Community Together, and they're celebrating 10 years. Joanne Antonacci, who is the district superintendent from Monroe to BOCES, was there, along with Dan White, district superintendent from Monroe 1 BOCES, and then Elizabeth Murray, who is director of community engagement from Causeway Community Partners, which is formerly the Ad Council. So what they did was they went through what their agenda and goals are. It's a lot of partnership, working together on behalf of public education for all students. It was a fairly short presentation. I'm going through what we discussed. A couple of things. School districts have historically faced challenges related to funding and general misunderstanding of public education's operations and impact. And so there's a need for a unified platform promoting public education. So that's kind of how Act for Education came about. The different education partners that work with Act for Education are many that we've heard of. M&T Bank, Channel 13, the CW, Advantage Federal Credit Union, Junior Achievement, some bank, JP Morgan Chase, Greater Rochester Business Chamber. So on very many levels, there is that interaction on behalf of, you know, that overarching goal of working together for the sake of our students and in public education. Schools are at the forefront for addressing our community needs, and we know that. I mean, look at COVID and what the school district was entrusted to do between meals and testing and, oh my goodness. So, and they reiterated that schools are important economic engines. U of R is the #1 employer in Monroe County, but then the school districts are the #2, second largest employer in the region, employing nearly 25,000 professional and support staff, which are major contributors to the local economy. So anyway, that was, you know, programs, partnerships, community outreach, and then working together on shared interests and goals. That was the gist of it. And they have their website, actforeducation.org. Every district is on the ACT website. We're welcome to go there, read it, contribute, and more information is readily available. And that's what we did for info this month.
Great, thank you so much. Is there questions for Catherine on that? Anyone? No? All right, and then Mark, I know you worked hard. How late did that go?
It was about 5.5 hours.
Oh, Lordy. Thank you, Mark. Mark's going to report on our annual, the NYSBA annual business meeting that he attended. It was virtual this year, so I don't know if that's better or worse.
Yeah, I know.
It's a mix. It's a mix. I mean, it's certainly nice to be able to do it at home.
Right, right.
But it does impact the ability for discussion and debate.
Yeah.
You know, out of just the technological limitations. I sent out the results that were my informal results to everybody. They are currently posted on the New York State School Board Association page under advocacy. Those are the official results. And you know, again, if anyone has any questions on specific ones, feel free to let me know. There were a couple that I thought would be worth pointing out. That let me just get to the right ones here. One of course was stipends for school boards, right? You know, we, as someone mentioned earlier, or Tom mentioned earlier, thank you. We do not get compensated for this, and there was a resolution to allow compensation, and they made a good case. I mean, the case really has to deal with encouraging more people to run, and if people have child care issues, a stipend could help offset the child care, so they could contribute to the community. And I think everybody recognized there's a lot of value to that. In the end, just the concern that it would undermine the public's perception of our motivation. You know, we're not doing it for money or power or influence. You know, it's if we want to do that, there's plenty of other opportunities. So that one did not pass. The other one was about strengthening gun laws, and there was an amendment to that failed. That just added more aspects of it. And interestingly, there's actually 3 groups, 3 camps on this. The 2 camps were about whether or not it was within the scope of the school districts. You know, is within the scope is that we got to do everything to help promote school safety. guns, have an impact on school safety, without a doubt. But at the same time, it also is impacting out in society that's outside of school. So those were 2 camps, and then the third camp was basically, Second Amendment trumps all, and anything related to laws on guns is bad. So it did fail, and again, I voted against it for us because I think of our conversations, we talk about scope. And it's also such a highly political issue. We just really wanted to focus on what our scope was. And we continue, as we all have, to work on school safety. There were some interesting ones, remember, and as a reminder, there's a resolution committee that takes these 40-some, it was like 43 resolutions, and reviews them and says, do they have merit or not? And the ones that are merited are recommended. The ones that are not merited are not recommended. There were 2 that I would point out that were not recommended that are worth pointing out. One is the opposing legislation that would eliminate single occupancy zoning for localities. And this was kind of a new one for me. But I started reading a few more things in the news that's just starting to happen. And what that's basically saying is creating laws that would say you cannot have single-family home neighborhoods, essentially, is my understanding of it. And it might be a little bit off. So there was, and a lot of that's tied around home equity, home affordability, making it easier to have more housing for, to support the broader public. The issue with that was, the other position was that it could, and some districts were seeing this, and remember, we have rural districts as well as New York City and Long Island, very urban districts, is that they were getting incredible increases in population, far faster than they can accommodate them in the school. And if someone took a single-family home and turned it into a 2-family home, there's no additional tax revenue. And so what they were finding is the growth was exceeding their ability to compensate for it, and the revenue was not matching it. So that's why they posed this. And I think, and I feel like they made their case. There's that's a very drastic, I don't say drastic, it's a very monumental change that we need to think about some more. But that resolution did fail, so we are not going on record as opposing it, although I think that has a lot of merit, or at least merit to continue to investigate.
Right.
And then the last one I'll just talk about is this was standardized testing. We have standardized testing that are Regents tests to get a Regents diploma, and there was a resolution to allow for alternative means for students that have a need for alternative means. And I can't say it as eloquently, but basically, there's students that have stress, they have anxieties, a lot of things that make it hard for them to succeed in the standardized test. And we just talked about testing, right?
Yeah.
And we really want to make sure that they're competent, that they succeed. But that would not mean they would get a Regents diploma. The idea was going back to a district diploma. And I remember, back in the day when I was in high school, there was the district diploma and the Regents diploma, and somewhere in those decades that went away. And I don't know when or why, but we don't have that option. And this was saying, let's bring that option back, because the impact of someone not getting a Regents diploma means they don't get a diploma. It's a tremendous life-altering impact when they could have demonstrated competency that have met the needs in another way. So I felt that had a lot of merit. I voted for it. It did not pass. Hopefully that'll come up again, because I think that's an important.
Well, and I think that's coming out of that committee work I referenced earlier with SED. Like,
Right.
I'm sad that we're behind in that, like, as a state, because I know, again, this was a pre-COVID piece that they've been talking about for a long time. So we're another 2 years out for that, too, with this new committee, but I'm hopeful that we make some progress in that
again,
area.
In New York State, outside of New York State, Regents, non-Regents diploma doesn't really matter.
No, nobody knows what it is.
Nobody knows the difference.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of good about Regents, creating a high level of competency and a high level of rigor and a high standard. At the same time, there needs to be more flexibility to help students
Right.
succeed.
I
Those are
agree.
so those are the ones. If anyone has a question for other ones, either here now or later, feel free to let me know.
That was great. I appreciate your notes and your work on that. I know it's a lot of work.
lot of work.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone have specific questions for Mark tonight, or? No, bless you. All right, great, thank you. I was like, we're done, but we're not done. Health and safety met last week, and Nicole or Kristen, does one of you guys like to comment on your health and safety meeting?
Sure. So clearly, last week was hard to do a health and safety meeting, but we talked about, we had some construction updates. I think the biggest one is just that our plan has been sent to State Ed. Now we're just waiting for approval. Phase 2 has started. George mentioned that a lot of the work that was for Harris Hill that was going to be Phase 3, that they really think they're going to get it done in Phase 2.
That's exciting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so that was exciting. Student input on the designs will be happening next week. They'll be going for that.
Yeah, that's really great. Do you want to speak a little more to that?
I can tell you that I have a very happy 9th grader that gets to participate in it. So.
Yeah, so the high school, for the community and for those here that don't know, is offering students to participate in the some of the redesign meetings with the architects, because there's going to be doing this library space,
In the commons.
the commons, and yeah.
And-
So I just think that's really fun. And there's something else too. I feel like I'm
Yeah,
missing
there's 3.
a different space, but.
Library.
Locker.
Oh, athletic space? or
Athletic
something?
space,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Team rooms.
Teams room. That's
Yeah.
what it was.
So I think
yeah.
that's really cool.
Very excited about that. Then we had reports, inspection reports from the nurses. Biggest thing is just that for COVID, hate that word, but we are just doing the 5-day quarantine for anyone that has COVID. Chemical hygiene officer, we had report on that. We had a review of the nurse exposure manual. There was some feedback given on that. We reviewed our health and safety committee charter, and the building plans for all of Penfield has been submitted. They had to be adopted and submitted to the state, which will then go to the state police. Will have their hands on those. There was some discussion around our district-wide safety plan, because our district-wide safety plan has to be posted on our website, but being cautious to make sure that we don't have very specifics on that, that those should really only be in our building safety plan. So really looking at that and ensuring that we're being safe there.
I think we do that, right? Yeah.
We
under
do,
constant
but
review.
we're re-looking at our section 6. There's a few specifics in there that we need
Gotcha.
to pull out.
Gotcha, great.
Yep.
Thank
And
you.
that's pretty much, do you have anything to add?
No.
Anyone?
Some discussion at the end about how, just the high school and the tragedy and everything and how that was handled and stuff like that. But that was more just everybody having a chance to voice feelings and stuff like that, so.
Thank you. Questions for Nicole or Kristen on that? No. All right, do we have any unfinished business? No? Any new business?
Can I just say something? Can
Yes.
the 3 of us just chat to make sure next week when we're at the conference that we're going to different things at some point?
Yeah, and Krista's going too.
Oh, you're going to? Yay.
Yes,
Oh,
there's
good.
4 of us going, so
Okay,
yeah,
good.
we'll have to,
Just to make sure we're hitting,
yeah,
we don't
email
have to do
and
that now,
see,
yeah, different topics.
Right, I brought my, on the onboard, I forgot, I wanted to tell you guys that. In the middle of the last onboard, it has all this, it's the nice big one that has all like the sessions and
Yeah, we don't
versus
do that.
me trying to read
It's
it
on
on
the app, right?
my tiny phone. All right, awesome. So, no new business. We are ready to adjourn tonight's meeting at 7:55 PM. I have a motion and a second.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Catherine and second by Mark. All those in favor? All in favor, none opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.